Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoteric Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who was once exposed to radiation and now possesses many features of an insect. That's right, Mr. Ryant Sibo.
Hey, what's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy? Good to be back.
Good to be back indeed. And a little tip of the cap to back when we used to do those little sketchity sketches, if you remember Ryant.
Oh, I remember Ryant. That's one of my earlier works.
Yes.
Genius, pure act of genius. Yep, I call him Betty Davis eyes.
Absolutely. But we're not here to discuss Ryant today. We're here to discuss a film, the last in our sci-fi series. Ryan, do you have a description for our audience?
I do, Jason. We'll take a propaganda at it in a moment, but first I'd like to say thank you for Verhoeven me back on the show. It's good to be back. Jesus. Today, hey, you wanted puns, buddy. Last week you felt cheated out of your puns.
That's
so
true. I asked for it. You delivered. My thanks to you, my friend.
Today we wrap up our series on retro science fiction films with Starship Troopers from 1997. Set in the 23rd century, we once again drop into a future where Earth has come together in peace, united under a military-industrial complex, tasked with going out to explore deep space. Humans are divided into two social groups, civilians and citizens, with the latter having extra freedoms such as the right to vote, earned through public service, mostly all based in military duty. We join a young Johnny Rico and his friends on the eve of their high school graduation as they all decide on various terms to skip higher education and enlist for service. From boot camp and beyond, we skip around through our cast of friends as they are quickly thrust into war, perhaps under false flags and pretenses, with an intelligent alien species of huge lethal bugs. As the war continues, we learn all is not as it seems, as the film spins into a morality tale of blind nationalism versus bootlicking fascism and the Venn diagram overlap that'll get you from one to the other. The film stars a large roster including Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Neil Patrick Harris, Dina Meyer, Michael Ironside, Jake Busey, Patrick Muldoon, Jake Busey's teeth. We even get another go in this series with Clancy Brown and a cameo by Rue McClanahan. That's right, Blanche is in this movie. Based on a 1959 book by Robert Heinlein, the film was directed by Dutch filmmaker Paul Verhoeven. Upon release, the film mostly went over everyone's heads and was taken not as satire, but as literal support for fascism, and as such didn't fare well at the box office, clocking at $120 million against an effects-heavy budget of $110 million. Time has been kind to the film, however, as it grew a cult following of sorts, and eventually spawned several sequels, video games, and graphic novels, etc. But all that aside, I've got to ask you as always, Jason, did you want to know more about this movie, or did it bug you to death?
Well, Ryan, I'm going to be happy to tell you. Thank you for delivering the puns today. Appreciate that. And I'll be happy to tell you right here in my opening statement. So Starship Troopers is a difficult film for me to judge. On the one hand, it's an intellectually and artistically appreciable satire and features exceptionally realized creatures from legendary special effects supervisor Phil Tippett and his team. The action scenes are well choreographed and exciting, even if the creatures themselves aren't necessarily given enough depth or lore to be as interesting as, say, the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise. And the small propaganda films that bookend the film and are peppered throughout are brilliant little satiric treatments and send-ups of that ultra-militaristic, jingoistic recruitment video. Loved those. But on the other hand, we have to acknowledge that what's presented on screen itself, without dubbing into the subtext, is incredibly shallow. From shallow characters to a shallow plot to shallow acting, so much of what is presented on screen is naive and idealistic, and while I understand that director Paul Verhoeven's intention is to satirize this universe and the ideals within, it's often difficult to tell where the imitation ends and the satire begins. I liken this film to the equivalent of an FBI agent going deep undercover to expose a criminal underworld only to find themselves becoming the very thing they wish to stamp out. You know, some Donnie Brasco situation, if you will. And as a result, I think this is a film that rewards discussion more strongly than the actual viewing experience itself. So Starship Troopers is an admirable and worthwhile satirical effort, but one that I found ultimately to exist as a frustrating and inconsistent viewing experience. Ryan, how about you, sir?
Jason, this movie is amazing. And I'm just going to come right out and say, I'll be out in the parking lot After the show, willing to fight anyone who thinks otherwise. I've got a citizenship to earn, so let's go. From the opening scene, this movie lets you know right away what it is and doesn't pull any punches throughout its perfectly paced and well-timed script. I think any critiques that could be made on the characterizations or performances here as they pertain to stereotyping are meant to be completely intentional. It somehow rides a delicate balance between not taking itself too seriously while also being gravely serious, just under the veil of the fun sci-fi bug-killing adventure. And a very spoonful of sugar makes the anti-fascist medicine go down kind of way. The messaging of this film has unfortunately remained relevant, but what has also shockingly stood the test of time here are the visual and special effects. Doing a little digging, I discovered this was an all-star effects roster of Industrial Light and Magic founders going back to episode 4, starting with Ken Ralston, who was with Sony Pictures at this time, Phil Tippett, who had his own studio working on the bugs and creature designs and motion effects, and Richard Edlund's Boss Studios that worked on all the practical effects from the spaceships and models. It's an incredible Avengers Assembled moment in film nerd history here. The over 500 effect shots took over half the budget, and the film was nominated for Best Visual Effects Oscar but lost to Titanic, which released just a few weeks after this film. Not to be left out, the incredible team-ups continue in the sound department, with legendary designer Steve Flick, who worked on the films like Apollo 13, Twister, Spider-Man, and Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead, teaming up with equal sound badass John Pospisil, who had worked on everything from Aladdin and Lion King for Disney, was coming off of Fifth Element, and would go on to do the sound design for audiophile Wet Dream movies Into and Across the Spider-Verse. The cinematography by Jost Vacano, who notably shot Das Boot and Neverending Story for Wolfgang Petersen, who directed Enemy Mine just an episode ago, is notably bold, choosing not to use shadows or depth of field to obfuscate the effects or talent, but choosing to put them on full display, often in soap opera-style lighting throughout the film. And the score wraps the whole package in a nice bow with composer Basil Polidouris, hitting the emotional beats and driving the film's drum and brass-filled military bravado. I'm gushing about a lot of reputations and resumes here, Jason, but suffice it to say, a lot of incredible talent was on full display for this, and it shows wonderfully. You will find very few critiques from me on my side of the double box 2-shot this episode, Jason. I loved this movie.
All right, excellent. So that's going to open up some pretty good discussion today, because what I would like to look at first is the text and subtext of the film and how that relates to the film's POV, as well as how that contrasts or compares with our experience watching the film. So,
okay.
The first thing that I thought was very interesting about this film, and I think anybody would say this, is that this is a gorgeous film, right? First and foremost.
Yes.
It features gorgeous vistas. We've got very bright cinematography. And I think where this is most noticeable is like the absolutely gorgeous actors. Every single damn person in this movie is a near flawless looking human being, to the point that it's like distracting. And so at first I thought it was like kind of funny, because I thought this was more of like a reflection of the casting decision of the mid to late 90s, which were obviously very visually driven, let's call it. And
yes.
It wasn't until I performed my research that I learned the reason for this casting, which is very interesting. So for anybody who's watching, I'm sure, Ryan, you found the same in your research, but to anybody who's watching, the sort of like thesis of this film, right, is it's designed to be a sort of post-democracy fascist fantasy world, right? This is basically a world where much of what Hitler wanted to do, what he won, right? And that was implemented, but it was implemented very long ago. So this is like, you could say centuries or even millennia later, but using all that stuff. So part of it, and part of the reason why everyone is so gorgeous, is because it's like that Adolf Hitler eugenics sensibility of everyone being blonde and blue-eyed and perfect, like that won out. And so as a result, everybody in this world is gorgeous. We have a violent world order that's in effect, wherein there's no room for dissension or conflict. So everybody has the same sort of POV. And as a result, there's no conflict in this world, which means that our characters are very naive and innocent and gung-ho. I did not necessarily appreciate those aspects of the film as part of my viewing experience, but I can appreciate it very much as part of the intellectual subtext that comes with discussing and analyzing the film outside of that experience.
Where did you feel like that fell short? Do you feel like that took away? Maybe I'm misunderstanding your experience or how it impacted it.
Okay, so here's the thing. So, and this is what I kind of touched on in my opening statement with regards to it being sort of like a a Donnie Brasco situation, okay, is that this film is ultimately attempting to be a satire, right? And satire is admittedly a very, very difficult line to walk. It's arguably the hardest, right? The audience has to be able to recognize that what is essentially on film, the text of the film, is false, so to speak. You're not supposed to necessarily be responding to the text of the film. It's the subtext of the film that's telling you and informing you what this film is about. Now, here's where I think this film kind of errs in that respect, is I don't think the film does enough to necessarily give you the wink and nod and let you know, hey, I'm in on this joke. So I think that when you're doing satire, the danger, and that's what I think this film ultimately succumbed to, is that at a certain point, you're kind of hitting all of the beats. And if you're not necessarily implementing that satire, then you're just becoming the thing that you're trying to satirize or poke fun at, you know? When the satire in this film works, a perfect example of it are the propaganda videos, right? As I'm watching that, I know the filmmaker is like, hey, this is a throwback to all these propaganda films. We're doing this hugely jingoistic, nationalistic sort of approach, like those old World War II films. Aren't these things ridiculous? And I'm like, yes, I'm with you on these, you know? But then once we get to the film, like, which, let's be honest, like, so this film, first of all, is very strange in its structure because it's essentially a war film, but also an episode of Melrose Place that has to do with high schoolers in love triangles. And like, that's just a whole weird thing to put. So again, I think that entire stretches will go by where there's no comedy, there's no nudges, there's no anything to say like, hey, we're satirizing this. It's like you're painting so by these numbers that you've become that thing that you're attempting to poke fun at. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And by the way, I would say that, and I mentioned this in the opening summary that I described, you're not alone. By and large, it took a long time for this film to catch on with the general public because everybody saw this and said, no, thank you. So nobody really got the joke or saw the satire in it. Even the original novel, Starship Troopers, on which it was based, was taken a little too serious, and people thought it was pro-fascism and all of that. It was glorifying. It was glorifying the stuff that it was supposed to be making fun of. But to me, the way I watch it, and maybe I have the benefit of time, right? Maybe I go into this movie knowing it's satire. So I'm like expecting it a little more versus walking in blind and 97 or what have you. So I get it. I do have that in my favor. But the way that I watched it on this turn, and I've seen this movie many times before, but the way I watched it this time was almost like Too Many Cooks, where it starts off as a thing that's very true to the thing. And it's, glorifying fascism, and it's like so fun and this and that. And as we go through, it slowly starts to warp into a minor key and descend. So it's a slow burn, but for, while all this action and fun stuff is happening all around you and explosions and bug killings. But first off, it starts with the press reporter, and he's reporting from the battlefield before we get to the 1 year prior and all of that. And then he gets eaten by the bug very violently. And Johnny Rico looks in the camera, you got to get out of here. Mm-hmm. And so we already know where this is headed from beat one, moment one, that this is going to turn south on everybody.
Sure.
And then it's like very soap opera lighting in the high school, and he's playing football and all the fun stuff about childhood. It's the, one of the points that Verhoeven said in the commentary that he was trying to make was, really how fascism steals innocence. And so when you watch that opening scene, and then you go right into high school and watch his high school romances and the soap opera lighting and all of the things, like those were all intentional choices to really lay down heavy on the, how innocent and timid, all the lies make that world, that cushy world that Johnny Rico was living in.
Well, yeah.
And then that all gets removed from him little by little. First his girlfriend and his relationship.
When does that get removed from him, though? Because that's not exactly true. You're saying like, oh, the girlfriend walks away from him. He just turns around and like starts banging this other chick who's just as attractive and arguably more into him than the other girl was. Like,
always.
And that's the thing is like, even by the time we get to the end where Neil Patrick Harris is in like full SS regalia, that's what's interesting about this film is it's not dark. Like nothing about the film changes in terms of tone, in terms of presentation, cinematography, anything. And I get why, because all of this is being told through the POV of this universe as a larger collective. And the individuals from Johnny Rico to Carmen to everyone else are all of the exact same mindset, because that's what this new world order has done. It has homogenized the entire world into being the same thing. And so this is kind of what I'm telling you, is that that's not interesting. And that's the film's point, is that is uninteresting. But because it's uninteresting, you're like, here's an uninteresting thing that I'm going to present to you and ask you to watch and experience for extended periods of time. And I'm like, well, I understand that, but that means it's going to be less interesting for me to watch and more interesting for me to talk about afterward. And that's a conversation that we've had several times on this program, is where does the value in terms of a film come from? Like, can a film present a more difficult viewing experience for a more interesting conversation afterwards? We saw this in 2001, so many other films that we've looked at, this is the response that I had to this film. I find this film to be more interesting to discuss with the decisions that it makes, but that ultimately many of the decisions that it makes have the unintended consequences of making for a lesser viewing experience. Like, I'm not a soap opera guy. I don't get off on melodrama. I never watched Beverly Hills 90210. I never watched Melrose Place. I think TV lighting where everything is just bright and you just throw on as many lights as possible and let all those color pops, like that can be good. But in a film, it makes it look and feel cheaper. So like this entire movie feels like an episode of television because of those lighting decisions, because of the acting decisions, because of the casting decisions, because of the screenplay decisions to involve make so much of this about this love triangle, during or post high school era. Again, it makes intellectual sense, but it doesn't mean that it creates an interesting viewing experience for me.
I disagree. I think that there was enough action sequences, bug killings, huge monsters, lots of great felt tippet puppetry, the spaceship explosions by Richard Edlund. This is the most fun I've had all series in a sci-fi film. The interpersonal relationships were very Paul Verhoeven-y. That's a description. Let's not forget, this is the guy that made RoboCop and, Total Recall and, Basic Instinct and a lot of schlocky stuff. He was coming off of Showgirls. And this was kind of, being honest, this was kind of the end of his career. He goes on to make a couple other movies that very few people saw or ever heard of. So this kind of bookended that huge run that he had from RoboCop on through this film. But I can't argue with you about the soap opera stuff. I personally enjoyed it. I don't mind a little cheese in my science fiction. We saw plenty of cheese in Flash Gordon, too much cheese in Buckaroo Banzai with nothing happening. And this, tons of stuff was happening. I felt like I was being dragged into a new adventure all the time. And the cast was so vast. Like I said, with Clancy Brown and Michael Ironside and, all these Jake Busey and all these other things going on.
It's got a vast cast, like not doing great work. Like that's the thing. You've got an impressive cast on paper, but none of them are good in this movie. The best is like pretty okay, which is probably like Michael Ironside is fine. I think Clancy Brown is probably the best, like the most charismatic, but like these guys are not doing anything that they haven't done elsewhere several times before. Casper Van Dien is a name and he's a bad actor. Dennis Richards is a name and she's a bad actress. I did think Dinah, I forget her last name, but the girl who played
Dina
Dizzy.
Meyer.
Yeah, Dina Meyer. She was great. I really liked her. I thought she did a great job. Jake Busey did a good job being Jake Busey, like he is in every movie that stars Jake Busey, with playing the, comedic relief, so to speak. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you've got a cast, but like nobody's really bringing the heat. And that could largely be a result of how it was, those creative decisions that were made in its construction. But again, I kept going back to like, this feels like an episode of 90s Fox television. This should be playing at 8 p.m. and only be an hour long. But then you have these amazing, amazing effects and those action set pieces. And you're actually right, because they are phenomenal. They're very fun. The big bug tanker scene, right? That's probably the most well-known scene of the entire movie. I think that's the one they even show in the trailer. That's a ton of fun. He shoots the thing, and we've got this great combination of CGI and practical effects. We've got that Phil Tippett style coming through with the animatronics, and it's really cool to see him blast the hole in the bug, and then he's holding on by one arm, and it's he's getting whipped around like a bucking bronco. Like, that's a ton of fun. I really enjoy that scene. But this entire movie is not that scene. I would argue there's more love triangle, like, nah, she doesn't want me. Lay your hands off my girl. I'll get you. And there's like an episode of Archie.
I would argue against that. I think that's a very small part of the movie. I would say that the lighting choices are all that was something that stood out very much to me. And I pointed out earlier is like the soap opera lighting. It was crazy how well lit the movie was. Even in the spaceship, when Roger was crashing into the asteroid, and then again at the end when the bugs are blowing it up, and it's broken in half and shattering and all of that, all very well lit. There's some cool lighting for the windshield of the Roger on the people's faces to match up with the explosions that were happening in front of them. They had it all mapped out, but they, of course, it's all green screen in front of them. So they had a giant, 6 or 9 bank of huge orange lights, tungsten lights, that they were pulling on a rope pulley system across the windshield to light up the actors' faces every time an explosion would be going on. It was really neat the way that they lit it practically and how much practical effects were done for this movie. For example, when the Roger also was crashing, all of that is as a model. And when it's broken in half, the interior of that was all being stop motion animated by Richard Edlund by hand, and his crew, obviously, of hundreds of people that were moving each little piece of the ship as it was breaking apart. They were doing all that by hand, little by little, in the same way that they used to do Star Wars Episode 4. And if you look very closely, you could actually see a tiny little Millennium Falcon on the back of the ship that they hid in there. I thought that was cute. But I thought the film had a lot of heart, and it was so much fun to watch in a similar way that a lot of the schlocky horror films we watch are fun to watch. And so that fun factor is really what left me with a good taste in my mouth. I guess I'm not going to sit here and defend a Casper Van Dien performance, as Oscar worthy, or I'm not going to die on that hill with you.
Yeah.
But I will say that the film was very enjoyable, and the points were made clear with me.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring up caring about the characters, because I was thinking about this, and actually I think that's a huge part of actually what creates a discord, and what to actually, by asking us to care for the characters in this specific instance, does end up taking away from the film. And in that respect, what I mean by that is I think that it's difficult to have satire and ideas be front and center when you're also asking us to care about characters and look at characters as real people. Because I think, in kind of looking at this, I was thinking about, okay, what are some examples of satire that really works? Okay. One is Dr. Strangelove that we looked at on this show.
Sure.
And another would be Veep. I think Veep is a very strong example of satire. Two very different approaches.
Okay.
But both excellent examples of it. And I think that one of the main things that both of those, show and movie respectively do is that characters sort of are stand-ins for ideas, right? In Dr. Strangelove, the crazed commander is kind of reflective of just, military might and traditional, soldiering, gone crazy as it is. And we've got the Milken, or whoever that was, the guy who, and he's kind of reflective of the bureaucracy, or the pencil pushers, making the decisions in government. And so you're able to sort of use these different characters to embody ideas, and I don't think this film does that. It's not like, oh, Casper Van Dien, Johnny Rico is the all-American male, which he is, but everybody is the same character. Everybody is that all-American male, It's not like Jake Busey represents this person and, Dizzy is this person. They're all sort of the same person.
Sure.
And maybe that's ultimately, and just thinking about it now, what relates back to what I said at the top of the show in my opening statement, which is that I did find this film to be kind of shallow in certain respects. In certain respects, it's rather, there's a certain depth to it. But in terms of what's on screen, there's often a shallowness. And I think that's part of it too, is that when you have all of the characters being exactly the same person, you can't make different statements. You can only really make the same statement over and over. So maybe that's part of it too, is maybe I'm looking for a more dynamism when it comes to the statements. Like, okay, you're criticizing this, but like, what else do you have to say about it? You know, and maybe there's something there where it doesn't really, again, explore a lot of it. It just kind of says what it says up front and then reinforces that over and over and over for, 120 minutes or whatever.
Isn't that the point, though? That in a fascist regime, everybody is the same and serves the state's purpose? That nobody has their own individualism?
Correct.
Or,
That's my point. 100% is that there's something about the creation of this film where you're doing it, and that's the point. So you're saying
the flaw is almost baked into the
correct.
Into the cake.
I think there's something conceptual about this because, again, Ryan, if you were like, "Hey, dude, I'm gonna tell you an example of a shitty storyteller," and I'm like, "Okay, cool," and you're like, "Sit back for an hour of shitty storytelling," and I'm like, "Bro, you may do the best shitty performance of your life, but that just means that I'm sitting through a shitty performance for an hour." And that's, I think, what the crux of what I'm saying is, like, taking a step back. Like, if I don't have to be the person sitting in there, I can appreciate everything that's going on. But when you're like, hop on board for this shitty story I'm about to tell for 2 hours, like, you're still telling a shitty story for 2 hours, and it's not entirely shitty. I'm not saying that, but I think that's the problem is you're like, aren't I doing a great job of presenting an uninteresting world? And you're like, yeah, which means I'm not interested.
So let me ask you this, because this is interesting. And by the way, I can't stress this enough. You're not alone. I didn't get this, so I'm glad I'm hearing this from you because I was curious from this stance. This point of view, and you're actually educating me on it. If this movie was not a satire, a proposed satire, and it was just a straight, and they removed a lot of those political elements from it.
Yeah.
And it was just a straight ahead science fiction movie, bug killing fun. Would you have enjoyed it more? Do you think that the fact that he swung for something and missed in your eyes ruined it for you? Because you're like, man, I wish you wouldn't have even taken the swing because it would have been a perfectly fun bug killing movie. Because you obviously love monster movies, and slop and slime and action and guns and all the fun stuff.
Yeah,
I figured there's enough here. Correct. Yeah, I thought for sure we were going to get on and gush about this movie together, and I'd be like, dude, that was so much fun when this and that, and then it seems like the weight of the proposed satire really brought you down. So I almost wonder if that wasn't there, if you would have had a better time with it.
Here's the thing. I thought about that too. I don't think so, because here's the thing. The satire is what works. And again, I kind of struggled with this. Like, I know it's not my job to sit here and say how I would make something better, right? I'm just trying to identify my response to this film. But that being said, it's like, okay, like, is there a way to pull this off? And I still don't necessarily have an answer to that, because again, like when you're dealing with satire, it's this whole greater conversation of where does imitation end and satire begin? And as I was watching this movie, that's where I was going through, where it's like, I get what you're doing, but I still have to watch an episode of Melrose Place in space. And I don't know how you resolve that. I really, really don't. But I can tell you the satire is the only interesting part of this. So if you remove that, maybe it works better as a quote unquote like thing unto itself. That wouldn't work for me because, again, I don't like what's on screen. I don't like the tech. I don't like all of the text. I do like the battles. I do like the creature effects. I like all of that stuff. But it is the subtext that I find interesting. And is there a way to introduce the subtext under the guise of a different text? I have not been able to come to a conclusion on that.
It's called Make a Different Movie from a different script.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think maybe there's just.
It sounds like you just straight up don't like this movie. Yeah.
No, again.
You like the messaging.
No, again, it's an interesting film, and I really enjoy, like I said up top, like on one hand, there's aspects of it that I love. I love the battle scenes. And look, it's very apparent. I'm sure you saw that they spent 52 of the film's $104 million budget on effects. So like they definitely devoted it. And that's what works about this film. The battle scenes work.
Sure.
There's elements of this that work, but there's so many that don't.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but it does sound to me like what the crux of what you don't like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is the three protagonists: Casper Van Dien, Johnny Rico, Diz, and Carmen. You like Michael Ironside, Jake Busey, Clancy Brown, all suitable jobs. Neil Patrick Harris, when he shows up, he sells it. And really, he's the heart of the satire. When he shows up, everything lands to me. He's the one that, at the very end, gets everyone to celebrate when he tells us the bug feels fear. Yeah. And that is kind of the big, heavy line at the end, right? Because, like, that's when when it all comes home that they've been fighting under a false flag operation. The humans probably set all that up to draw the military operation to go into outer space and fight these bugs in the first place. Bugs had no business fighting us. They didn't come at us. They didn't launch that asteroid or kill the Mormons. That was all set up. And, that's why we are able to celebrate in the fear and suffering of others, because we've been lied to and the propaganda works. We're bought in hook, line, and sinker. So I feel like all that stuff you liked, it just was that our three protagonists of which the whole film hinges.
Well, what we're saying is, to enjoy this film, a part of you has to go, this is shitty what I'm watching, but it's supposed to be shitty, so I get it, right? Like, and that's an interesting discussion to have. Like, we've looked at this before with in certain different ways with material like The Square, for example, where the filmmaker, these minutes that you're spending here aren't about making you comfortable or pleasing you. It's about actually quite the opposite, to make a statement. And then where does the line between movie as artistic statement versus entertainment, where does that line get drawn? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What's the responsibility of filmmakers? So
I looked past it. I was just having fun with a smile ear to ear, because there was so much action. And I do think, if I was going to disagree with you on something, that there is far more action and fun stuff happening throughout the film to carry scene to scene, to give me to hang my hat on, to get me through those moments. Maybe this is also where our age difference plays into a little bit, where I was raised with Melrose Place at Beverly Hills 90210. So maybe it's a little more normalized to me. And you're like, what is this shit?
Oh, yeah. No, I
totally get that,
I was
too.
always out on that stuff, man. Nah, I never got into those, high school dramas. But, I know plenty of my friends did. My wife does, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah,
hey, man,
that's
in my world, jam. If you wanted to be smooching in high school, you had to know the difference between your Dylans and your Brandons. That's just the deal. Dylans and Brandons. You had to know.
That's hilarious.
I did think, real quick, as an interesting point, that they never showed the leadership or ruling class in this film. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit that I did pick up along the way, that the movie is entirely from the perspective of the people, or the industrial military complex machine. And so you never really get to see who's pulling the strings here. Usually in a film like this, we've picked up on other films like this before. Usually there's someone, a group of people in the room, mustache twirling, or making these choices, or moving the chess pieces around, or you're at least seeing who is gaining from these endeavors. And you never get to see that in this.
Yeah.
Just the result of it. This is a, ground floor working man's kind of movie. And I did appreciate that take as well.
Absolutely. So with that, we will go on to one of our final features. We do every episode, 3 scenes, where Ryan and I reference the 3 scenes, go figure, that we feel best summarize our response to this film. Ryan, buddy, you always go first.
My first is all of the would you like to know more camera media cameos. I thought it was real interesting. We would always cut back to the news crews throughout the film and all the action sequences, trying to control the narrative a little bit. And then all of a sudden it would cut back to the, would you like to know more? And, click on that. Also interesting, real quick, side note, Verhoeven loves his commercials, because if you recall in RoboCop, he did the I'll buy that for $1 little cut-ins. And then, this had the would you like to know more? I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
The next is the crashing of the Roger Young spaceship, specifically in the finale of the film when it breaks in half. I had to pick one effect setup because I love the special effects so much of this film that I was most impressed with that would represent all the rest of them. And I'm going to choose the crashing of the Roger Young spaceship. And then lastly, the It Feels Fear celebration. It's a hell of a way to end the film as we celebrate the pain and torture of our chosen enemies. Concludes the whole message nicely. And again, a topic that remains relevant to this day. Everyone be afraid. Jason, how about you, buddy?
For the first one, I've got the tanker bug battle. I think this highlights everything that works about the film, from the intense battle choreography to that exceptional blend of the animatronics and CGI. I think this is arguably the central and standout scene of the film. My second scene is the Carmen breaking up with Johnny moment, because for as much as I like the other scenes, these are the scenes that I did not like. These are the scenes that dragged the film down for me. These are the scenes that feel like, again, it's made for a high school audience, and even despite those strong action set pieces, we still have to deal with these sort of naive, eye-rolling love triangle melodrama moments. Didn't like those. And then, my third would just be all of the propaganda videos. You know, you called them the Would You Like to Know More videos. So those highlight the moments where the satire is like 100% firing on all cylinders. The tone, the content perfectly lands those notes of cynicism that I think Verhoeven is trying to capture for most of the film, and that I felt was, again, very inconsistent throughout. Let's go ahead and move on to our formal star ratings. I'm going to give this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like, there's a lot on here that I really, really liked, and there's a lot here that I really didn't. Again, I think that for me, this is a film that I would appreciate discussing more than necessarily watching. I love the decisions that were made from a purely creative and artistic standpoint. However, I do have to acknowledge that for me, a lot of those decisions did not necessarily make for the best viewing experience. So pretty sure I know what you're going to go for, Ryan, but let's hear your formal star rating.
I'm giving this one 4.5.
Okay.
It's not the best movie I've ever seen. It doesn't have Oscar award-winning acting. It didn't blow me away, but I loved it. Smile ear to ear the entire time. And as I always like to say on here, I would watch this again right now. If someone walked into my house and grabbed Starship Troopers off the shelf back here and said, let's put it on, I would say, absolutely, let's do that. And I would enjoy every minute of it, even though I just watched it. So it's a fun one. It has held up well over time, and still some relevant messaging for all the kids out there to pay attention to. So 4.5 stars.
Love that. So to everyone watching, thank you for taking part in our discussion of Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok. That's going to be at Esoteric Cinema. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube. For myself, Jason Peters, and my good friend, Ryan Siebold, this has been Esoteric Cinema. Continue to appreciate film and enjoy the movies.